Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm super excited to chat with you all today. I see some familiar faces, some familiar names, and so I'm excited to get to know all of you a little bit more. So thank you so much to those of you who invited me. I'm always excited to talk with students and to share a little bit about my journey and specifically about building a scholar identity. So again, my name is Sarah Rodriguez. I'm an associate professor in engineering education in the College of Engineering, and my work centers on identity. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to me. So a little bit about me, beyond like what the title says. I am a tenured faculty member here, and I have been a faculty member for almost 10 years. And in thinking about my identity, I think about my identity in a whole bunch of different ways, and we'll get on to that. But I think of myself as a wife, a mother, a Texan, all of those things. And in terms of my research interests, they are around engineering and computing, identity, and higher education. And identity is really at the root of everything that I do. And when I say identity, I mean, like, how do you know yourself in a particular role? What does it mean to have an identity? What does it mean to be yourself? And as I put at the bottom here, most of all, I believe that identity is really important. I think it's important to how you show up in spaces. I think it's important to how you got to the space that you're in. How you chose this path when you could be doing a lot of other things, all of which could be really great, but you chose this particular path. So I think that there's a lot of things about who we are and where we come from that really shape the kind of scholar that we become. So I was asked to talk a little bit about, who I am, and I think that it's important to kind of see like where I've been to know and explain a little bit more about who I am. So I started as an English and Spanish major at Texas A&M University, Commerce. And it is a small regional institution at the time, had about 10,000 students. I was a very early, I wouldn't call myself first gen because my dad went to college, but my parents were divorced. So I didn't really get a lot of support from him. So I was kind of navigating this college process, really not knowing what was going on. So I stumbled into English and Spanish. And the reason that I did that was because originally I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. I thought that was going to be my trajectory, no pun intended, but I thought that was going to be it. I was going to do all the things related to that. And then I struggled in calculus. It was the very first time I had ever struggled at anything in my life. And when I say struggle, I made an A. And I took my A and I said, oh, well, I obviously am not meant to do this role as an aerospace engineer. I'm going to go as far away from math as humanly possible, which was English and Spanish, not knowing the different kinds of directions that my life would turn. And so I got my degree in undergrad there. I moved on to a degree in college student personnel at the University of Tennessee. So I got really interested in how students develop their identity development, how they make choices about going to college, what sort of engagement activities they do once they get there. And so that propelled me to my PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. So at UT Austin, I started doing work that was even more identity-based. So thinking about issues of gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. And I worked for a men's project, interestingly enough, that was really tasked at thinking about men and masculinities, what it meant to be a man. And I got increasingly tired of talking about men in my day job. And so I decided to write my dissertation on Latina students. And so because I wanted to focus on Latina women and femininities and what it meant to be a woman and what it meant to have an identity as a woman. And I thought, well, what better place to do that than in STEM fields? So, you know, you're seeing a kind of a connection back to the original idea. And so I did my dissertation on the identity development of Latina students in STEM fields. And that started what now has become my line of inquiry for my entire scholar career. So I finished up my PhD. I took my first faculty job at Iowa State University, and I had no idea what kind of scholar I was going to become. I was just happy to have a job. I think that there were something like 10 jobs given out that year. And so I was just excited to be there. But I immediately started getting connected with people who were doing grant work. And what I mean by that is the College of Engineering reached out to me and said, hey, we've got these cool projects that are focused on, you know, professional formation of identity. Do you want to come and like be a part of the team? And I just said yes to everything that first year because, you know, NSF grants don't hit, things go wrong, people leave, you know, I didn't think that anything of saying yes to everything. And then 6 months later, 5 different NSF grants hit at the same time. And they were all focused on engineering and computing identity. And so I said, okay, well, I guess this is what we're studying now for the foreseeable future. And year after year since 2016, year after year, I've gotten more into the space of engineering and computing identity. And really now that's how I moved over into engineering education. And so it was through this series of choices and happenstance and positioning that I eventually made my way to Virginia Tech. And so here at Virginia Tech, I study the identity development of a variety of individuals, but I definitely focus primarily on Latinx students, students at community colleges, and also thinking about race and gender in particular. So I've had a little bit of a windy path to get to my scholar identity, and it's still winding. So in terms of identity, like I had mentioned, my research kind of focuses on these main areas. So thinking about gender, masculinities, femininities, different kinds of identities, but always within STEM contexts. And almost always within community colleges or Hispanic serving institutions. So at a very base level, I really think that who you are, what you come with, and what environment you're in really shapes who you become as a student, who you become as a scholar. So I say all that to say, to get to this part of my presentation. And that is about identity and the process of becoming a scholar. Because I don't think that anyone wakes up, you know, from their birth and is a scholar. I think it's a series of choices, it's a series of happenstances, it's a series of things and places that you have been in that have really helped to sculpt who you are as a scholar. So when we think about, you know, scholar identity, it's really this process of becoming and continuously asking yourself, who am I in that process? And who am I really pushing towards being? And it's not just an individual process. So for me, it wasn't just like Sarah got in a room and said, I am going to be this kind of scholar. You know, it really was about how I made sense of myself, like not only as an individual, as a Latina going into these spaces, but also as a member, you know, of various social groups. So how do I interact with engineers? How do I interact with social scientists? How do I interact with Latinas? How do I interact, you know, with all these various groups? And what identity can really do for us in terms of importance is it's how I came to understand myself and be able to position myself as a scholar. It was in many ways how I became associated with particular communities. Like I really got connected to the engineering education community, which is how I moved over from higher ed to engineering ed, which for those of you that aren't aware, like moving fields is actually quite difficult in a variety of ways. But that was the community I felt most connected to. And in terms of recognition, having a scholar identity is not only, again, just about yourself, but other people within those communities recognizing you as the kind of person who does a particular role, the kind of person who is becoming an academic. And they have to recognize you as well. So in terms of building and maintaining a scholar identity, because of my work, I spend a lot of time thinking about this. I spend a lot of time thinking about how identity is shaped, considering what it means to be myself, and what kind of person that I or you or any of us is becoming. And really trying to figure out, what is a sense of self and being that roots you? Because I'm sure all of you, even in this very moment, are being pulled by a million different things. You probably are on your phone, maybe you're checking your email, like maybe you're doing a variety of things. Maybe you're worried about home, family, your dog, all these things. But really getting to this idea of identity is something that can very much root you and strengthen you in who you are as a scholar. The other component that I think about before I get to my kind of like consejos or like tips about how I did it is from where I sit, I try to always take an intersectional approach to scholar identity. So recognizing that each and every one of us holds a bunch of different identities around class, race, gender, ethnicity, culture, and all of these things mix together in a really unique way for each one of us to build your scholar identity, so that any one of us is going to have a very, very specific scholar identity, even if we share characteristics or we share some group affiliations. Each one of us is going to have a slightly different identity because we have these different intersecting identities. So getting to kind of lessons learned, I guess, about my own scholar identity. And I always hesitate to use lessons learned because, like, I was just telling everyone earlier before everybody got on the call, like, I feel like this is just a continuous process that you go through year after year and place after place, and you're always kind of refining like what it means to be your own scholar and to have your own identity. So the first thing I feel like that I've really I've learned in this process is that you have to hone your own identity as a scholar, or someone else will. I think that for many academics, they get super unhappy. And you don't have to go very far to see unhappy academics. They are everywhere. And I feel like a big portion of that, like beyond the structural things, like people don't get paid enough, like hostile environments, I feel like part of it is also that they have allowed their narrative to be co-opted in some form or fashion. And they don't have necessarily a sense of who they are in this space. And I think that for me, that's one thing I've really tried to be as good as I can to do, to like take control of my narrative in the way that I want it to look and that I want it to feel, and not be co-opted by all of these outside forces. So for instance, what that has looked like for me is I say yes to things that reflect my values. So for instance, one huge value of mine is I want everything that I do to be research to practice and vice versa, practice to research. I want to have connections with people who are actually doing the work. So I say yes to a variety of things that maybe other people wouldn't like me to say yes to. I say yes to writing a book to practitioners. I say yes to doing talks on the ground with faculty and staff at any level. Um, and that's just a piece of who I am. And I control that part of the narrative of my story because that's a really important part of the kind of scholar I want to be. Likewise, and I'm working every day on this one, saying no to things that go against those values. And this is really hard, and particularly for those of you who have not just marginalized identities, because that's everybody, but have additionally marginalized identities. Like, as a woman of color, I feel like I get asked to do every single thing ever. And I say no to a fair amount, but I also like I've had to really figure out like what are the values and what are the boundaries um, of protecting my time and my energy and who I am as a scholar. So, for instance, if someone approaches me and is like, "Hey, I just want to add you on this grant so that we'll have a social scholar," and oh yeah, like you talk about community cultural wealth things, and then I'm like, okay, yes, I do those things. um, and I'll be like, well, how do you intend to work with, let's just say, the Latinx community? And they're like, oh, we don't plan to. And I'm like, okay, well, then we probably don't need to be partners because that's not going to work out really well. And so sometimes I have to say no to things like that that just don't make sense in terms of my identity as a scholar. The second thing that I feel like I've learned in this process is defining what being a scholar means to you. So there are a million different ways to do academia, but you have to define what that means to be in your own roles. You have to define what it means to do academia in your own way. So for me, I saw lots of examples when I was coming up of people who, worked 90 hours a week. They did not have any boundaries about when they worked, how they worked, did they see their kids? Did they know their kids? Are they divorced? Like, I saw some really terrible things. And I didn't want to be that kind of scholar. I didn't want to work all the time. I didn't want to go around and be sad all the time, essentially. I wanted to enjoy what I was doing. Even when it was hard, I still wanted to be able to say, no, I actually really like this. So I've spent some time like trying to craft my own way of what it means to be a scholar, a mother, a wife. And some examples of that, and these are mine, they don't have to be yours, but like I don't work after 4 p.m. I honestly don't work after 3 p.m. That's the secret. I don't work on the weekends. Like if I can help it, this book project is like killing me. So maybe during this book project, but other than that, for the rest of my academic life, I really have never worked on the weekends because I set that as a boundary like pretty early on. Um, I travel a lot, but I limit it to 2 nights because I want to be present like on my campus. I want to be present for my students. I want to be present just in general. So, it kind of depends on what it means to do the kind of scholarship that you want to do. I think of one other example that I had in terms of research to practice. I think about one of my good girlfriends. She's one of the most brilliant writers that I know. And we were talking about what it means to be a scholar and what it means to write to particular audiences. And she said, Sarah, it is not my job to translate the work that I do to the common people. And that defines how she's going to be an academic. So she writes like really theoretical things that are super smart and heady and awesome. I can barely read them as an academic. And I know that like my colleagues are not reading them. Like my practitioner colleagues are not reading them because they're so dense. So I really wanted to define my writing by, it is clear. I use headings. It is clear, like maybe to a fault. I once had a reviewer tell me that I wrote like an undergrad. And that hurt so bad. I think it was my first year of being a faculty member. And it hurt so bad. I was like, man, I'm never going to submit anything else again, which wouldn't have worked out as an academic. But somebody told me, they're like, you know what, just keep it moving, like send it to somewhere else. And after 6 months of kind of moping about, that's exactly what I did. And it immediately was accepted by a different journal. And it's one of the highest cited, the highest cited work that I have. I think it's got like 200 citations in 4 years or 5 years. So, you know, just sticking to your guns almost on how you define even what it means to do simple things like write and work, because it's those simple things that really come together over time. In terms of the third thing I feel like that I've learned is about engaging in transformational resistance. So this one may be like a little bit bristly to some people, and that's okay. It's good to feel uncomfortable as an academic. But this is something that's been really important to me, is because I wanted to become the kind of scholar who made a difference, and who resisted various things in the academy. So, you know, whether that was like being identity evasive, like a lot of scholars are identity evasive, whether that meant, you know, being angry all the time. Like I see some scholars who are just angry all the time about everything. You know, some people are like, oh, if you're not picketing, you're not a real scholar. Like if you're not like doing crazy technical science, you're not a real scholar. And all of that is just noise. It's just noise, because you have to be and engage in the way that makes you feel most authentic. And the way that I felt most authentic was to figure out what my stand on the table issues were. So for instance, when I'm in faculty meeting or when I go on to a new project, like what are the things that I can't compromise on? And I usually don't have very many of those. I usually just have a couple, but for anybody who's ever been in a meeting with me, I will stand on the table for those like couple of things. And, you know, it really has to be about doing it in your own style. I remember, I think it was my first faculty meeting with like the POCs at Iowa State. We had like, I don't even remember what it was called, but it was like a POC group of faculty. And someone got very upset with me personally and was like, you're not doing enough. It's like my first week. I don't even think I'd been to a general faculty meeting yet. And they're like, you know, you need to be more like resistant, you know, you need to like be out there doing these pickets and things like that. And I was like, that is not who I am. That is not my style. Like, I will do the things that work for me, and you can do the things that work for you, and we can agree to disagree. But I think that that's just one take home that I would definitely send out there, is like, just do you, in terms of the work, because the work will transform you in good or bad ways. So it's really about kind of knowing yourself and the way that you want to show up as a scholar. The last thing that I have as things that I think have been helpful to me in building and maintaining a scholar identity is that people will look to you. And the first bullet I have here is tell a story about Victor, my dissertation chair. It was like 2012 or so, and my dissertation chair takes me out to lunch, and I think it's going to be like a light and happy lunch. And then all of a sudden he comes at me with all of this scholar identity work. And he's like, you might not feel like you know anything at this point, Sarah, but there's always someone coming in line behind you. There's always somebody who's going to look to you as a leader. There's some Latinas out there who are going to look to you as an example. And as you get further on in this process, that is something that you just have to contend with. That is going to be a part of your journey. And at the time, I didn't really know how to take that other than like, thanks, I guess. But over time, and definitely when I started studying identity, I started to see what he meant. Because when you have doctor in front of your name, people pay attention in a way that they necessarily didn't before. And people look to you, whether that's for mentorship, sponsorship, whether that's just as someone who kind of knows their way around and can be of help. And so, in all of that, that means that you have to have a sense of who you are, because you can't help people, or you can't be of service, which I'm sure many of you want to be of service to your communities, to your families, whatever. But you can't do that unless you have a very secure idea of who you are. Because if you start trying to move in this academic world without having a strong scholar identity, between all the feedback, all the meetings, all the like gritty things that happen, it can start to wear at you. And having that strong sense of identity is going to keep you planted. It's going to keep you in academia, or wherever you end up. I think that this goes beyond just academia, but I think especially in academia, it can be a very difficult space to maintain self, when they're like trying to tell you, conform to this, do this thing, make yourself, this certain thing. So anyway, the big takeaway here is that you just need to have a clear sense of self, because people are going to look to you later on. So in wrapping up, the last thing that I wanted to leave you with was about exploring your own scholar identity and really starting to think about these questions. So, and then I have some harder questions on the next slide. So what I think to be some easy questions, and that might be me sitting in my privilege right here, but where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years? So thinking about the type of work you want to do, the surroundings that you want to be in, the community that you want to be in. What are things that are important to you about being a scholar? So particularly thinking about, do you really love the research? Do you really love the teaching? Do you really love service? I remember in my first faculty job, somebody rolled up at Iowa State and they're like, I hate research and I hate grants. And I'm like, okay, you went to an R1 institution. That's going to not work out. And it didn't. It didn't work out for them. The 3 people that I'm thinking of, they all left, because that's a very specific, R1 high research intensive places are very specific context. And if you don't love research, like even if you do love research, like that, it can still be a really hard context. Likewise with teaching. I was at a teaching institution as my last institution, and there were literally my colleagues who were like, oh, I hate to teach. And I'm like, you are at a teaching institution and you hate to teach. Okay. It just didn't make any sense, like, for where they were at. So, in thinking about your own scholar identity, you have to think about the things that are important to you. And then finally here, what brings you joy, a la KonMari. For those of you who aren't familiar, like the joy of tidying. And the KonMari method is about like assessing everything that you do in terms of like, does this bring me joy about being a scholar, or does this bring me annoyance? Whether it's the technical or the grading or the mentoring. I know personally for me, I hate grading. I hate it. I like to teach. I like to help people learn. I love to mentor. I would rather die than grade things, but I do it, but I just don't like it. It's not my favorite. The harder questions that I have that I would like you to think about the bigger questions. It's just, what kind of scholar do you want to be? Point blank, simple, like who are you trying to become? And really thinking about what experiences have helped or challenge you to build and maintain that scholar identity. So maybe you come from a family, like I do, a family of farmers and migrant workers who like worked so hard and gave all of themselves and did so many things so that you could go to school and not, pick cotton and pick berries and do the migrant trail like over and over year after year. You know, that's part of my scholar identity of like bringing and coming to this scholar place. Likewise, what sort of wealth are you bringing? Like, are you a super connector? Like, for instance, I love to connect people. If I see one good person and I see another good person, and y'all need to meet each other because that's just the way the world should be in my mind. And I try to build like social capital of the people that I know. So the final one here is, what assets do you already have, and what will help you grow? So in terms of assets, like what are you really good at? What do you know you're good at? And then where are maybe some areas that you think like, okay, like I need to get extra training on this. I need to expand my networks in a particular area. I need to get more mentors in this particular area so I can build a stronger scholar identity. These are all things that, that you should think about when thinking about who you want to become. So I'm going to stop right there. And here's my contact information. And I'm sure it'll be shared later, but don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm very responsive and findable and whatnot. And it's not Twitter anymore, it's X. But yeah, you can find me out there. So don't hesitate to get in contact.
Thank you. Now we're going to open the floor for questions. If you have questions, you can either put them on the chat or raise your hand so you can ask your question to Dr. Rodriguez. And we have here a question on the chat from Kathleen. Would you say much of your development in finding your identity happened during grad school or after? I feel like it's only now at the end of 5 years that I'm starting to see how to fit my identities into my research.
Catherine, this is a really good question. And I think that the answer is some and both. So I think for me, I definitely feel that, like in terms of like you're just now feeling how your identities fit into your research. And that just comes with growing in your field. And so I think for me, the deeper part of this story was like I really came into my identity as a Latina during grad school. Like I had a focus on Chicano, Mexican American and Chicano studies. And you can like see my shirt. But like I didn't have that sort of strong identity until I went to grad school at UT Austin. They had a huge like MAS program, lots of Latinos. I had my first Latino professor, like that wasn't in Spanish, let's be clear. And so like it was a really difficult time of like trying to figure out how to like get it woven together. And so I feel like there was a lot of pain, like growing pains in my grad school work. And just like I was also really young, like maybe not by some other standards in different fields, but I started grad school when I was 20. I was done by 26 and hadn't done a lot of living. And I felt some kind of way about that. And so did my colleagues and everybody else. So I had to really learn how to tell my narrative of like being a young scholar, which is hard.
Thank you. And now we have another question from Cassidy on the chat. She says, it seems like our scholarly identity is highly tied to where you can find success in funding, certainly during the tenure process. Do you feel you have more freedom post-tenure to explore your scholarly identity?
Um, That's a tough one. Because I feel like the success in funding, yes, that was highly important. Because I wouldn't be in engineering education right now if it hadn't have been for funding. Because that's where the direction of my research went, was towards engineering and computing. But I also feel like I didn't really care about tenure either. So I had a really good role model in grad school, Rich Reddick, who just put out a book about like resistance and the academy himself this week. Like, and his whole thing, I remember him coming in like such a cool, like just a cool dude, African American man. And he came in and he was like, I'm trying this professor thing out. We'll see how it goes. I might get tenure, I might not. It's cool either way. And that really resonated with me as someone who like wasn't 100% sure of whether they wanted to do or how this whole academic thing was going to work out. So I told myself very early on that like I was just going to be who I was, and if they didn't like it, then I'll just go do something else. And it's funny because even when I did my job talk here at Virginia Tech, I remember one of my now colleagues, she came to the door face when I was sitting with a search chair, and she was like, that, my friends, is about my job presentation. She's like, that is a job presentation of a post-tenure person. Because essentially I came into my job talk and I was like, I do these things. I use critical frameworks. If you don't like it, don't hire me. Like, and I was very unapologetic about it. So I feel like post tenure, I think I have the language to be able to do that, but I think I was already effectively living that beforehand.
Now we have a question from Eileen. Eileen, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Awesome presentation. I always love when you give talks. So one of the questions I'm asking now is how, we have these frameworks and stuff. How do we go about it in like the interview process? Like knowing what you know now, how would you vet the departments that you're interviewing at, but not coming across being like, what if they are not, or seeing like the potential of change in that department. So how would you navigate that if you were back onto the academic searching job now?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I did not vet my last institution well enough. So I feel like I have some horror stories if you're ever interested. It would be a series of questions, but it would also be a series of paying attention to red flags. Like, so questions that I might ask: how do you support pre-tenure faculty? Don't be afraid to ask that question. Like, that's a very like, and if they can't answer that question, the answer is they don't. Like, period. Like, if they're like even hesitating or like, oh, I don't know, maybe like, no, they should at least have a functional response to this question. In terms of the department, like asking, and it depends on where in the process. So when you do your phone interview, like not the time to ask the hard questions. Phone interview, like ask questions about teaching resources, ask questions about what do you like about your job, like I consider that like Pollyanna cute questions. Like that's what the phone interview is for, is Pollyanna cute questions. The on campus to me is where you start asking more pointed questions. And to be able to ask pointed questions, you have to do your homework. So like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I have it. But because it's so ridiculous, I put together a notebook about Iowa State, or sorry, not Iowa State, Virginia Tech and Iowa State, both of them, but like a 1-inch notebook where I had done all the homework about the institution and what their supports were, where their money came from, how much money they gave to certain things. So I could ask very specific questions once I got to the on campus, which I think really helps because it's like that shows me, like as somebody who interviews people, like that shows me that you are interested in this place. And that shows Like as a candidate, you get a sense of like whether people know about their resources and how people feel about those resources too. So like my previous institution, I remember asking some of these questions like, oh, talk to me about support, talk to me about grant infrastructure, talk to me about community in the department. These are like super softball questions, I feel like, to ask when you get on campus. And the red flags that I should have seen was, oh yeah, we know somebody does that. That means it's not important to the department. That means it's not important to probably the university too, honestly. Like it just means that that's not important. Other things that I should have picked up on is the use of I statements rather than we statements. So I just call him the evil department chair because he is. I had an evil department chair and he would say I all the time in talking about the department. And I should have caught on to the fact that he was just literally the worst human being that has ever existed. But I thought, oh, well, he's just giving from his perspective. But I think if I would have thought about that a little bit more and thought about the fact that he kept me away from the faculty. Also, if they won't let you talk to faculty and students, there's a reason in the job process. So yeah, so transparency, I think, is key, and discussing fit. And when you get the offer, I think you can ask even more pointed questions about fit.
We have another question on the chat. So what are other ways you need to practice say no?
Yeah, this is like daily hard for me. Probably like the hardest thing that I have to do in my life. So I'm a big believer in the NCFDD. I don't know if we're an NCFDD institution, and that's the National Council on Faculty Development and Diversity, NCFDD, and they have like a whole webinar that you can access as a member institution on the art of saying no. And I need to listen to that every day of my life. But some practical ways that I try to do it is I first say, like, does this align with whatever I'm trying to do right now? Usually the answer is yes, because like otherwise people wouldn't be contacting you most of the time. But if no, then that makes it easy. So then I just say like, no, thank you. The harder ones, I think, are the ones that you really want to do, but you just don't have the time. So something that I feel like gotten good at is like saying thank you for thinking of me. Unfortunately, I am concentrating on blank. So right now I am concentrating on my book. Please continue to think of me in the future. If you're looking for other people who do similar work to mine, here's a list. So like, not only am I like propping up my Latina scholar friends, like I'm putting them, on lists. Like I know for one person that translated into a $5 million NSF grant for her. And she's like, oh my God, thank you. Like, you're welcome. Like we can't all have all the grants. But I try to do a validate and redirect approach to thinking about saying no. Unless it's like just wildly out of my scope. And then if it's wildly out of my scope, I'm like, hi, thank you. It's not really in my scope. But you might consider these individuals. I've gotten to like referring people because I think that's helpful. Maybe it's not, but they can just delete my email if they don't want to. If they don't want my help.
Thank you.
Oh, and never answering right then. That's one thing that people have taught me, and I'm getting better at that one. Like giving yourself, be like, okay, yeah, send me that to me in an email and I'll take a look at my calendar. Sorry, Niana.
Oh no, I was just saying thank you for that. I guess at least for me that's really hard to say no to things, and it's a daily practice for sure. I think for all of us in here. Anyone else have any other question? I guess I do. Can you tell a bit more on why you decided to work with practitioners and not going for the more traditional academic type of career?
Yeah, I'm a Gates Millennium Scholar. So through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates gave, I forget, a lot of money to send 20,000 students at the beginning of the 2000s to college, completely through their PhDs. And so as a GMS scholar, we were taught that to whom much has been given, much is expected. And so I recognized that I was given a gift that I mean, literally, I don't know of any other scholarship program who covers like your undergrad, your master's, and your PhD. If you do, please populate it in the chat so I can like let my family know. That'd be real great. But GMS year after year talks about like the fact that you have a lot to give back because you've been given so much. And that is sometimes burdensome. I'll admit that, like, but it was so woven into the fabric, I think, of who I was growing up. So I got this scholarship when I was 17. So like, I literally don't know any other way to be other than somebody who wants to make sure that my work is translatable, wants to make sure that I'm not just shouting into the void. It's really important to me.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else have any last final questions for Dr. Rodriguez?
I can flip one of your big questions back to you. Where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years with the trajectory of your work?
Taylor, that's unfair. For those of y'all that don't know, Taylor's on my team. So she can ask hard questions. So yeah, 5 years, like I want to be a full professor. That's the goal. Full by 40 is the goal. And it's very ambitious goal. But it's my goal. So I want to be full so that I can be like, I made it, I guess. Like, at a very basic level, that's kind of what I want. I want to be able to be part of that like minuscule number of Latinas who have full professorships. I don't even think it's at 1%, honestly. I think it's something like 0.43. I don't know. It's very small. And to just have the freedom and the like responsibility at that point, because until you get tenure, it's like you're dating with your institution. You know, as a grad student, you're not even dating, you're just like talking. You're talking, and then as a faculty member, when you have tenure, like you're dating. And myself right now, I feel like we're in like a long-term relationship, but I don't feel like we are married until I hit full. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's just the way I think about it. And until we're married, like I'm not going to give my whole self to an institution. I probably won't even after, let's be clear, because I don't believe in doing that. But it is much more of a commitment. So I think like for myself in 5 years, that's where I see like the job going. In terms of the work that I really want to do is like participatory action research. So like getting Latina students in engineering and computing mobilized to participate in research, to do things that they want to do to move themselves forward. Like I don't know what that is because I'm not a Latina in a program, like, and that can change from year to year over time. So I definitely see the work becoming more participatory and more action-based, like as I go. And I really want to just, I guess, continue to lean into more critical like frameworks and things like that. Like I definitely have noticed like my criticality quotient like going up over time. Like I used to be like, oh, I'm never going to use any sort of critical anything. I'm never going to talk about, I don't know, resistance. I'm never going to do any of that. Like, and then like year after year, it just became more important to say those words out loud, especially like I came from Texas. And so Texas has had a lot of issues in terms of academic freedom and being able to do what you want when you want to do it. So that's definitely been something that shaped where I think I'm going. I would like to be banned in like 30 states. That'd be cool.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Thank you, all of you who came here today. I think this was one of the best Master Your Futures talk that I've attended. So thank you for that. And this recording is going to be uploaded in our website later on if you guys want to go back and watch it again, because I feel like so inspired by just listening to you talk and sharing your journey and what does it mean to have your identity as a scholar. And really nice. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all. Thanks for like coming. Love it.
Thank you.